Steve Albini of Shellac, Big Black and Electrical Audio Studio, episodes 185, 150, 127, and 21. And joining me now is none other than Mr. Steve Albini. Steve, welcome back to the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me. Congratulations on your 10 years.
It's a long time, man. It's a long time for a podcast. Thank you. It has been a while since we talked last. Last we talked, it was right when COVID kind of really kicked in.
Right.
So it was April.
Right.
April 2020. We did a little mini episode about the whole like and subscribe thing, which I found to be very engaging. But you were still, like, electrical was in a very precarious position at the time.
We have since reopened sort of fully. Like we, for a while, we were doing socially distant sessions where everybody had to maintain distance and everybody had to be masked. And then as the caseload started to come down and vaccines were readily available, we were doing, vaccinated sessions where people could sort of have their own protocols for their sessions, whatever made them comfortable. Inside the studio, like we all wore masks and we were all socially distant and that sort of stuff. But within a session, if there was a band that was behaving like a pod and living together, traveling together, or whatever, they could set their own rules for their session. We had very little COVID transmission in the studio. As far as I know, I think we had 0 cases that we can trace to the studio during that period for sure. Since then, things have gradually lightened up to the extent that most people are not wearing masks now. I still wear a mask whenever I'm in a group setting. And we had the dormitories closed for a while just because it seemed like way too much work to fully disinfect a dormitory room after somebody had been there. Pre-COVID, to change the rooms over, we just had to, change the sheets and vacuum and call it good. But then with the pandemic underway, we didn't really feel comfortable turning rooms over to people that hadn't been completely disinfected. So we were doing, much more thorough disinfecting. And then there was just so much work that we just gave it up entirely. And so we didn't have the dormitories open for a couple of years, actually. And we've just reopened the dormitories, and so now bands can stay here resident again, which is great for the productivity of the sessions. And, it saves a small amount of money for the band, like the cost difference between getting an Airbnb or a hotel's and crashing here is not great. It's a little bit better to stay here in terms of cost, but that's not the main thing. The main thing is that there's no travel time, and you don't have to chase anybody down. Like, you don't have to figure out where somebody ended up after the night out, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. Where's Joe at? No idea. Let's go put out an APB, so we record.
I think her name was Julie.
Right.
That's
Well, and that's such a that's such a wonderful thing that the studio provides. Again, to stay in it.
Yeah, it's great. It's great for productivity, and it's also, bands can have something of a normal life. They can sleep in, they can make breakfast, they can, if they're not needed in the morning, they can hang out and get some work done or whatever. Like, things like that are, it's just, 100 times more convenient to have everybody in the same building all the time than it is to have people scattered around. So yeah, the studios, were quite busy. In the depths of the pandemic, everybody made an album at home, and some of those people sort of fell back into the practice of making music and are now doing it in, more public settings. And so we're a lot of bands that sort of revitalized themselves after the darkest parts of the pandemic are now sort of carrying on. We're getting an awful lot of bands coming in who were kind of on hold for a couple of years and are now sort of itching to get back on it. The one thing that hasn't recovered is our international clientele. We, like, pre-pandemic, we probably had about 30% of our clientele was international bands traveling internationally to come here and make a record. And the Trump era immigration regulations and the subsequent, the pandemic was bad for travel, but all of the nonsense regulations that have been put in place for immigration are by far worse than the pandemic was in terms of limiting travel access. And it's punitively expensive for bands to get visas to come here, and they have to spend money just to apply, and there's every possibility that they can make a whole bunch of plans and then be told at the last minute they can't come and all that kind of shit. It's really stupid bureaucratic stuff that was all instigated by Trump and hasn't really been corrected.
It's a Kafka-esque nightmare, some might say. They wouldn't be wrong to say that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
And it's not like it's a easy time getting across, to a different country to do anything as a band.
I mean, it's actually I'm about to go to France to do a recording seminar. I didn't have to do any paperwork at all. Right. It's so trivially easy to do things in the rest of the world. It's really only hard to do things in the U.S. Everywhere else is easy.
Well, it's like healthcare, right? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Which that's a much longer discussion.
We're the one place on earth that does it incorrectly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, we don't know how to do it. Oh, yeah. Except for it works in literally every other country. So other than that, yeah, I could see where that would be. There's a lot too. There's been a lot of changes. There's a new shellac record finally.
Correct.
In next month, I believe, is when it's coming out.
I mean, it's hard for me to put any kind of a temporal gate on it, just because we finished it so fucking long ago that for me, it's a record that's been done and dusted for a good long time. It's just not in the stores yet,
Right, and I believe last time I had you on for a proper episode, we talked about the Scrappers song, and that was like 4 years ago, right? So that was it's been a work in progress.
Some of the songs on this record we've been playing for 6 or 8 years now, and we've been playing them in our live sets for 6 or 8 years. The record was conceptually finished in the spring of 2020, I want to say. We had a tour that we were doing when COVID really started to peak, and our tour was interrupted, and then the plan was to finish the tour, and then while we were in great playing shape, zip into the studio and knock out the last couple of songs and then put the record out. And all of that got put on ice for the better part of a year and a half.
That was the last show I saw. It's not the last show I played, but it's the last show I saw, and things were changing so quickly that I believe that show was sold out, and there was maybe, in the Milwaukee I'm talking about, and had 30-40% of the people actually there, because people at that time were like, oh, this might not be a good idea to go out.
Yeah, it was a weird scene. Like, the show had sold out at a smaller venue, and so they moved it to a larger venue. And then when we played the show, it was like, man, this crowd looks kind of thin. I don't know that it was so wise for us to move the show. And then when we did the paperwork, it was like, oh yeah, we sold all the tickets. A lot of people didn't come because of the COVID thing. And we were like, Jesus, I guess this is serious. And then the next night, same deal. Like, we played in Madison, same deal. Like, the show had sold really well, and it was sold out, but there, the actual attendance was pretty low, and we're like, yeah, fuck this. We're not going to keep doing this. It's just not safe. And so we bailed after that.
Right.
And then we had a tour scheduled for the fall of 2020, and we canceled that and rebooked everything a year later. And then when it came time to do that tour, that's when the Delta variant started to peak, and it was again not safe to go out on tour. And it was like, Jesus Christ. So we canceled that, So then in the fall, we had all still blocked out time on our schedules to do this tour. And we were like, well, we're not going to do the tour. So, but we all have the time on our hands. Let's go ahead and finish the record. So we used that time instead to finish the record in the studio. And, then after that, it was just like a long production chain of events. Like all the pressing plants were preoccupied with major label releases. So we couldn't get time on conventional presses. But then we found this new press that was using a new, more environmentally friendly technology and printing and pressing with a different material and using a different technology. And we got some samples, and then those sample records were great, really super low noise, really great sound quality. And we thought, well, let's use these guys. And then a long, arduous process of getting clean test pressings from this one place on Earth that uses this new technology.
Yeah.
And we have the luxury of having Bob Weston, a mastering engineer, in the band. So he could make a custom lacquer for this pressing plant that, would ameliorate some of the technical stuff that was hanging up the test pressings. Like he could make a special lacquer that would avoid the problems that we were noticing. And this is all, it's all good. Like this is a learning process. It's a developmental process. People are learning how to accommodate this new technology. And, I'm happy to be part of that development, happy to be part of that process. It just means that it takes for fucking ever to get anything done,
Yeah, no, ain't that the truth?
Once all this stuff is internalized and once everybody is dealing with these new processes in a sort of a normalized manner, then it won't take any extra time. It'll just be like, oh yeah, you have to do this to avoid pre-echo. You have to do this to make sure you get, I don't know, fucking whatever mastering terms they use. But so that there was that, and then some minor delays with the printing, and just everything stacked up on everything else, and it just got to the point where it was like, this record is going to come out eventually, and we just cannot worry about when.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
We've always operated that way. Like we've never scheduled anything along, I know there are some bands that do the thing where they're like, we got to get the record out in the fall, and then we'll do colleges, and then winter break, and then in the spring, we'll do all the festivals in the spring, and then summer, we'll do cold climates. We'll do the northern leg in the summer. Like we've never done any of that shit. We've just, we write songs. When we have enough for a record, we make a record. The record comes out when it comes out. It costs what it costs. It goes into the stores when it's ready. Anybody who wants one can have one,
No review copies. Yeah, and I think you keep it adventure based. I think that's a good way to keep it interesting and keep the longevity and not have it seem like work necessarily,
Yeah, I mean, for the way all of us in the band treat shellac is that it's a joyful escape from our normal lives. It's not something that we should feel beholden to. It's not something that obliges us to do anything. It's a thing that we do that means a lot to us, and we accommodate it the same way that we would accommodate, family or, other interests of ours. But it's because it's not our principal occupation, we never have to feel like it's making demands on us, And if like in another scenario, like let's say this band was our livelihood, and we had tours booked that were predicated on the release of a record, and suddenly there's a 6-month or 9-month delay in the release of the record. Well, then that would cause enormous consternation, and we might find ourselves like sort of argued into the position of doing the record by other means as a way of getting it done in time rather than doing it in the way we wanted to do it, and so that the record itself is the way we want it to be, right? And we're just never in the position of having to make those compromises. We just never have to do anything that we're unhappy with.
It's a good position to be in. Steve, I want to Thank you, by the way, so much for over the years. You've been very giving with your time coming in this show. You've come on this show 4 times. You came on my previous show before that. I talked to you for a zine with an audience readership of my cat back in the 90s. Like you have, for me, you're an example for how to engage with community and art and DIY in a way that is productive and builds.
Well, that's very kind. I do feel, however, that the way I behave is the way everybody behaves until they have an excuse that they can use to cop out with, right?
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
Like, and I've just never bothered copping out. Like there are so many things about my behavior as a musician, as a business owner, as a person who works in the studio, somebody, a participant in the scene, that were so many things that were formed by my observing how the scene functioned so smoothly when I first hit Chicago in the 1980s. And there were all of these incredible DIY punk bands that were putting on shows independently, just like find a spot, throw up a flyer, have somebody take $1 at the door, and you have a show, or just like, oh, you need a bass amp? I have a bass amp. You can use my bass amp. Like, it just seems so, like, everything about it just seemed so matter of fact and so simple. Like, none of it had any kind of, scheming or strategy to it. It was just very straightforward. The phone rings, you answer the phone. There's no mystery there, And I just none of it seems odd to me, because that kind of indoctrination that I went under really formed me as a person. Like, it just and whenever a question comes up, like, it almost always seems like it can be resolved by thinking, well, what's just like the normal thing to do here? Just do the normal thing and it's fine,
Right. Understood. Well, I appreciate you doing the normal thing for this show and with me so many times over the years, and I deeply appreciate it, and so do many listeners of the show. So I just wanted to get out there at.
Wait a minute. You didn't tell me you had listeners.
Again, I mentioned my cat. They're around. Last thing, Steve, thank you so much for being a part of this, by the way. It's an honor to have you for this 10-year anniversary. Protonic Reversal has now been around for 10 years. Is that too long, not long enough, or just right?
It kind of depends on whether you are having to, like, if you have topics that are at the front of your mind that you want to talk about, then it's not too long. If you're having to, like, use AI to generate topics for you, or having to, like, scroll through other blogs and podcasts to see what other people are talking about to try to find things to talk about, then it's probably time to hang it up.
Not a danger so far. Well, we'll see. We'll see where the day takes us. But appreciate you so much, Steve. Thanks for being a part of the 10-year show. It means a lot to me. And
no sweat. Hey, send me your email address and I'll send you the file for this.
Sounds good, brother. All right. Take care.
Yeah. Bye-bye.